Hey everyone, I'm Dr. Rick St. Onge, and in this video, I am going to talk about some of the key differences between iron and competition kettlebells. So I have a couple of different kettlebells here today. This one are competition kettlebells, and this one are cast iron kettlebells. Like the name says, the cast iron kettlebells are made out of cast iron. You know, that stuff that you grill your steak on? Then again, I don't think it would work out with your cast iron skillets. Anyways, well, because these ones are made out of cast iron, obviously the heavier you go, the bigger they're going to be because you need to have more metal for it to weigh more. So these ones are not hollow, they're just one solid block of cast iron. So that's why the size of them changes depending on how heavy they are. Whereas the competition style kettlebells, they remain the same size. Now, why do they remain the same size? Well, one, they're made out of steel. So the shell, essentially, they're made out of steel and it's hollow inside. Because they're all the same size, we have to fill them up with enough metal for them to, weigh, so that you can weigh them differently. Now, with this one here, all the weight of these competition style kettlebells are mainly top heavy, meaning that most of the mass of the kettlebell is within like the top portion of the actual kettlebell. So the competition kettlebells are relatively top heavy and the cast iron kettlebells are relatively bottom heavy just because it's a full solid block of cast iron. This one here, essentially, the way that this one and this one they're made in order for them to weigh more, essentially, is that within their hollow shell, they add a little bit more metal inside of it so that it weighs more. So this one weighs 16 kilograms, this one weighs 40 kilograms. Unfortunately, sometimes with these type of kettlebells, you have to be a little bit careful with them because if you drop them, some of this weight can actually come loose, and then you'll notice that the weight will start to rattle within it. So that's how you know it starts to get, you get a little bit wear and tear in here, and depending on how hard you drop it or how many times you drop them anyways, the weight inside of it might shift around, so the bell might not be quite as evenly distributed. Whereas some of the newer style kettlebells, like this one from Kettlebell Kings, you can see there is actually a hole in here. Now with these ones here, from what I'm told anyways, the metal is actually poured in, but it's actually like a part of the kettlebell. So no matter how hard you drop this thing, the metal won't shake free. And you don't have to really worry about the rattling or uneven weight distribution as you would from the earlier versions. Now, from the older style competition kettlebells to the newer style competition kettlebells, there's a bit of a difference now. So the main difference is the overall height of the kettlebell and the width of the handle and the shape of the handle. This one compared to this one, and that one for that matter, the diameter of the handle is about 35 millimeters. This one, I can't quite remember off the top of my head, I think 33 millimeters. So there's a bit of a difference that way. Now, if you kind of compare, the size of the kettlebells, or you compare the competition kettlebells to the cast iron kettlebells, like I mentioned earlier, just because to make them heavier, you have to have more metal. So since they're one solid block, they have to be a bigger size. So a big difference between them is the heavier the kettlebell, the bigger they're going to be. Now, is that necessarily a bad thing? Not necessarily. However, the one thing you have to realize now is that your technique is now going to change when you're holding them. So when you rack this kettlebell, the bell here is going to sit pretty high up on your forearm, versus when you use some of the heavier ones, the weight's going to be shifting a little bit lower on your forearm. And as a result, your technique might have to change a little bit just because of the weight distribution on your arm. So that's one of the reasons why I like the competition kettlebells, is that no matter what weight you use, your technique stays relatively the same. With competition style kettlebells, like you mentioned, they're fairly uniform across brands, except for some of the newer stuff like this, but most of the competition style kettlebells are relatively the same size. Whereas the cast iron kettlebell, from what I've seen anyways, a lot of their moldings is very different. So you can have 10 different brands of cast iron kettlebells, and you might have 10 different shapes. So even, if we compare this one to this one, these are actually the same brand, but you can kind of see the style is so much different even within the same brand itself. I mean, this handle is so much more straight on the top versus this one's a little bit more rounded. Now, some of the other differences that we have within these kettlebells is the space within the handle itself. So for instance, I have some bigger than average hands anyways. So if I want to grab this one with two hands, my pinkies are going to fall off to the sides. Whereas the 60 on this one, not as much. So if I go to the 55-pounder on this side, it's fairly comfortable with two hands, and the 40 kilogram on this one is actually very comfortable with two hands. So personally, when I do something like a two-arm swing, I will always go with a cast iron kettlebell just because it fits my hands a lot better than a steel kettlebell. Another one of the major differences between the two is the cost. Generally speaking, the cast iron kettlebells are going to cost less than your competition style kettlebells. There are some exceptions, I'm sure, but generally speaking, your iron kettlebells will cost less. So to sum up, there are lots of differences between cast iron and competition style kettlebells, and hopefully this helps to shed a little bit of light on some of the differences between the two and helps you choose which ones are right for you. So if you like this video, please give it a like, please subscribe to my channel, and we'll see you next time.